everyone. After 2 days fierce competition, Kyushu debate open, probably many of you have exhausted, but we have 2 more days to go. This is by now the annual event between Korea's Ewha University Debate Association and Kyushu University English-Speaking Society debate section. Tomorrow we have a public debate called International Friendship Debate, but before that, or together with that, we have been having debate workshop for Ewha and Kyushu students taught by Professor Peter Kipp from Ewha University. This year, this is not a credit course, so we go fairly informal. We have mostly, well, I think all of you participants are debaters, students with some experiences of debating. So I think the workshop will be more practical and more probably practice of debating. But this year we have chosen an important topic of the present time, internet security or the security in the electronic space. We have been concerned about the safety, although the electronic communication is very convenient. So we have a very important topic, and I hope you will learn about the debate, learn about the topic, and probably most importantly, to do more cultural exchanges and the improving friendship among participants. With this, I would like to leave the floor to Professor Peter Kipp. I'll be joining you again tomorrow. Sorry, I must leave for another debate workshop, debate camp in Japanese language. Today until 21st in the camp in Kyushu in the mountains. So I'd like to welcome Ewha debaters and Kyushu University ESS members and Peter Kipp and get the debate started. Thank you. We will videotape the session, mostly lectures and debate, but if you don't want your faces shown up, we can edit out your faces. So please let us know.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Professor Inoue. Pleasure, as always, and good to see you all. I think I'm only really familiar with 3 Kyushu debaters here, Yasu and Hung. But here's my chance to meet a few more of you debaters, and if you attend a lot of debating events, I'm sure I'll get to know you after maybe the 2nd or 3rd time we meet. It usually takes a little while, forgive me for that. And Mizuki, I guess I know 4 people. Plus, of course, my own debaters from Ewha. So, yeah, if you look at the program, we have a lecture in the morning. It's not purely lecture. Anybody who's been to any of my lectures knows that at least half the time you're talking about things with your partner or with me, trying to develop concepts yourself, understand concepts. But the point of the morning's class or lecture is to understand some basic philosophical concepts behind electronic space and the internet. Because if you really want to be a good debater, you have to really be very deep in your analysis. You can't just superficially analyze one cause and one effect. You have to go behind and think about the purpose of something and how it affects society and how it affects other systems in society as well. So that's the point of this morning's lecture. And just as a question, how many of you attended the policy debate workshop with American debaters? Anybody? Raise your hand if you did. 1, 2. Okay, so you already have a good idea of the topic of the main exhibition debate tomorrow. But I think you'll find that because this is British parliamentary debate, that my approach is probably very different from the approach that you took for that policy debate. Some things will be the same. If you have any good comments to make or any interesting additional ideas or even a correction maybe if I have my facts wrong, please tell me. Because the policy debaters, you go really into depth on a very, very specific policy motion in a very practical context, one place, the United States. British parliamentary tends to look more at social systems and ideologies and philosophies, as well as just the practical details. Okay, and then after lunch, we'll do a practice debate, not on the same motion that we're doing tomorrow. After the morning, you'll have one day to think about, if you're debating in that exhibition debate, you have one day to think about what your strategy is going to be. And we'll also draw positions for that exhibition debate tomorrow. We'll draw the positions either before or after lunch, depending on what time we have. So you'll have about a day to make your case, to do any extra research you want to do. I think everybody already knows who your partner is going to be, but you don't know whether you'll be opening government or closing government or opening opposition or so on, right? So based on what you already learned from the other workshop or based on what you learned in today's workshop, you can think about it more. But we'll be debating other motions in practice, other motions relating to electronic space, the internet, messenger services, and so on. And after the lecture finishes, or probably in the middle of the lecture at some point when I want you to have this for reference, I'll give you a handout with the slides that I'm going to use. 4 slides per page. I have extra copies. But I don't want to give it to you now because I want you to be listening to the lecture and the slides. On the back, motions. So this is the list of motions we'll be using for the practice debates. We'll do some of them. Right, anything else to say? Okay, in the afternoon I'll talk a little bit more about how to make principle arguments, how to develop a principle to make it really have an impact on the debate. And we'll do another practice round, and then tomorrow another topic, a very short lecture or short presentation. I think at the end of the day, if you guys have any specific requests or something you'd like to cover, you can ask me. If nobody makes any specific suggestion, I'll just think about the kind of debates that I saw today and the kind of things that I think you need to work on, and I'll choose a very short topic and do a really short lecture in the morning. And then another practice session together, the public debate, and then a final practice session after the public debate. If people still have any energy. If people are really tired, we can cancel it and just go to dinner. Any questions about the schedule? Good. All right. Are we on time? We're even ahead of time a little bit. Good. So I'm going to do one more thing before we get started because I always find this useful. I like to have a list of the people who are going to be here so I can try to remember your names better and refer to it. And also maybe it even helps you if you're trying to remember people's names. So I'll start with Ewha debaters. And each person just briefly, maybe even stand up and say hello and tell me your name or tell everybody your name. You don't have to say a lot of extra stuff, but if you have anything really important you want to say, go ahead and say it. And starting with our most senior debater. So go ahead, tell everybody who you are.
Hello everyone, my name is Day1-1. I am a senior from Women's University, and I participated in the same workshop 2 years ago, so I know Mizuki. So I also want to have a great time this time. Thank you.
My name is Hera Jong, and this time is my first time to participate in the Kyushu workshop. I'm a little sleepy now. But anyway, please be my friend. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Kipp, and I was here for the workshop early this year. It's nice to be back.
Kim, and I'm doing this English debating for 3 semesters until now, so I still need to learn a lot about this English debating, so I want to learn more with you guys. Thank you.
We all know you, but that's okay.
I'm Mizuki. So
This is
Oh.
so I participate in this workshop every year, and so this year I also looking for this meeting again.
And then starting in the next row. Yes.
So this is my first workshop with our boarding university, so and I'm sleeping now too. Thank you.
Okay, and since I don't know you, you have to say your name again to me so I can write it down.
Hello, I'm Francisco Hirata. I'm freshman of this debate section, and this time is my first time to attend this workshop. Nice to meet you.
Francisco Hirata. All right, next person.
Hello. I'm Hikari Hara, and this is my first time to join workshop. I want to be my friend too. Nice to meet you.
Okay, behind Hikari.
Hello, and nice to meet you. I'm Miyu Himeno. I'm also freelance in this section, and also this is the first time to join this workshop. I want to study in this workshop, and also I want to be your friend. So.
All right, next person.
Hello everyone. My name is Choi Yuji. I'm a freshman, so I participated in this workshop for the first time. I'm looking forward to talk with you.
Okay. All right. Next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hung. I'm from Vietnam, and this is my second time joining this workshop. So I'm really looking forward to practicing with you guys, and I hope that we can be friends and let's keep in touch.
Hello, everyone. I'm also Hung. I'm actually from Nagoya University, and somehow I ended up here after the tournament. So thank you for letting me join.
Hello, my name is Yuki Yamaguchi. So I'm also the freshman. So that I want to make this a good memory. So thank you.
All right, next person.
Hello, my name is Naoki Takahashi. I'm also a freshman, and this is my first time. This is my first workshop, so I'm glad to participate in this workshop.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Why? Hey, I'm Yasumi Takehiko. Please call me Yasu. I'm a sophomore in Kyushu University. It is the third time to participate in workshop. I wanna be friend with you.
Good.
Hello, my name is Kiura Kazuya, but something violent a part of my friend call me Daddy. So please, you can call me Daddy. But I have to keep the secret. But I have to keep the reason secret. So I can tell you the reason why I'm called Daddy. So, in sum up, call me Daddy. Thank you. Daddy.
Daddy, like father, daddy?
Yeah.
Okay, just daddy. All right. And?
Hello, I'm Yoshikumi Omura. Actually, I don't know about this program. Because I have an answer I can hear. So if you have, if the tutor that interest me, please contact.
Okay, good. So, and I'm Peter Kipp. All right, so, well, yeah, I hope that we can make some good friends and also learn something. And with that said, I'll get going with the talk then. So still roughly on schedule, I think. Yeah, 10:01, oh, 10:03? 10:03, okay, almost perfect timing. So, here we go. It's Electronic Space and Freedom of Expression is the title. And as I said, I have slides for you, but while I'm talking, you probably want to take notes. Get some paper, pen, and you'll also be needing paper to brainstorm for ideas, for ideas for arguments, ideas for cases, questions, whatever. So, oh, sorry, there we go. So that's the title, Electronic Space and Freedom of Expression. You'll also notice that when you get the handout, it has my email address. So if you need to ask a question, you didn't think of the question during the lecture, or if you want anyway, you can contact me via my email. Or you can ask Professor Inoue also. He can probably give you a copy. And contents. This is a very general table of contents. There are a lot of subsections, but I'm going to talk about what is e-space, what is electronic space, what makes it different from physical space. And then concepts of public and private space, because I think these are the philosophical ideas. And then last, talking about like key actors and key concepts related to some specific motions, just to look more specifically at how these general ideas work with specific motions and contexts. And then there are other motions we can also use. So probably the first debate today will use one of the other three motions, not the one for tomorrow's debate, but one of the other three as our topic for today's first debate. And then for our today's second debate, we might use a different one. But anyway, that's where we're going to go. So starting out with what is e-space? And everybody just read together with me so that I know we are roughly the same speed, same time. And if you have a question, you can just say stop. Practice if you have a question. Everybody you say? Stop. Okay, good. So ready? Go. Oh. Okay, what's your question? Oh, no, sit down. You're out of, it's protected time. 1 minute hasn't happened yet. Okay, now what's your question?
This is all on the slide that you have.
It's all on the slide. I'll give you the handout. If there's something you think you want to write down because you have an idea or a question, or you think it's like an important word that you want to remember or whatever reason, like write it down. I usually find writing helps me concentrate, so I usually write notes anyway, but if not, yeah. Okay, so everybody ready? Okay, go. Electronic space, e-space, online space, includes all the duly created spaces in which people can interact and take part in activities that make up their daily lives. These spaces include, but are not limited to, shopping sites, social networking sites like Facebook, news outlets and portals, fan sites, private blogs, any sites where users can interact and comment, email, messenger apps, and probably more that I didn't think of. Question. So, we live a lot of our lives online these days. What are some of the good and bad points about the online world in comparison to physical space? Ask a partner. If you're not sitting with a partner, I think you should probably move so it's easy to talk to a partner. Okay, everybody stop. But if you were in the middle of a sentence, always finish your sentence. Everybody okay? Right, so actually, many good and bad points, I think, but generally, at least in the context of this lecture related to public and private space and freedom of information, there we go. Some key points that I want to bring up. Key points are, number one, that e-space expands the space we have and our opportunities to act in it. And I heard a lot of things about different ways it does that. Like different people in different regions can access the same information easily. or disabled people, or you can do it anytime, right? So it expands our opportunities, but points 2 and point 3, this is sort of what this whole lecture is going to be about this morning. Number 2, everybody read with me. Are you ready? Go. But it's not as stable or safe as physical space. It's harder to know who the actors are, what their wants and needs are, and what the rules for action are. Number 3. So the key point or question of this whole talk is how we should expand our norms and rules for acting in physical space into e-space. So what I mean is, if you're talking with someone face-to-face in physical space, you maybe know you have certain norms about when it's your turn to talk, and when it's the other person's turn to talk. If you're talking with someone in e-space, it's not quite so clear. Like, you send a message, and then when do you expect the other person to send the message back? We don't have as many rules. We don't really know. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think. So that's one of the key problems. If we expand that into the area of public space, space we share, what are the rules? What kinds of things can you say when you're not really sure who all the other people are? If you're physically there, you can see who they are. You can see, like, how loud am I talking, who's going to hear me, what effect will it have. Maybe you can even see their results, their answers. But if you're in an electronic space where people are far away, it might be a little hard to know. So I think that's the main point of this talk. And moving on, public space versus private space and freedom. Yeah, okay. So this is just an interesting picture I put in because I thought, oh, it's time for a picture. But it actually seems like this is a kind of a trend where these days people feel like somehow even in their home they need to somehow isolate themselves even more, or in their office. There are a lot of, I just typed in like private space on Google and then looked for some photographs. And it seems like this is a real trend that like different companies are offering like these kinds of little tents or temporary houses you can put no matter where you are and just isolate yourself so you can have your own private space. Because I think that's actually one of the impacts that we have. Now that e-space is also coming into our private space, like people feel like they don't have as much private space. They need to somehow it translates into the real world. They need to have a physical world where they isolate themselves. This person's on the computer in that, so that's a bit ironic, but that's just a thought that came to me when I saw that picture. And more generally, if we're going to talk about public space and private space, we need to have sort of some kind of understanding of what those terms mean. So that's what this slide is about. Again, read with me, starting from the top. Are you ready? Okay. Based on both tradition and social contract theory, we assign more rights and freedoms to private space than public space. So here on the left-hand side, private space equals controlled by you. And some examples are your body, your personal space, your home, your car, your notebooks, your personal letters. In that kind of space, you should have freedom of action, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought. So you have pretty wide freedoms, including freedom of action. If it's your personal space, pretty much you can do whatever you want. But if you go to public space, it's not controlled by you anymore. It's controlled by the community. Now, what the community means is also something that we need to discuss, but examples include public squares, public buildings, marketplaces. Do you have freedom of action? No. You have to follow certain rules. Freedom of conscience, maybe, that applies, but there's sort of a different freedom you have to think about. It's freedom of expression. And I have a question.
Is there a difference between freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, and freedom of expression, freedom of speech?
Yes. There is a difference. That's why I put them in two different lines. So freedom of conscience means the freedom to believe what you want, to do what you think is right or wrong. And freedom of thought is very close, but freedom of thought I think is a bit broader. It means that you can think about and imagine and fantasize and do, like, let your mind sort of do whatever it wants. So it's a little bit of a different emphasis. Freedom of expression is, I wasn't quite sure which way to put these two, like which ones they most closely connect to. But generally, like, freedom of action is most limited in a public space. There are certain actions you just can't do. You can't suddenly take your clothes off in public. You can't suddenly, like, start picking your nose, right? I mean, you can, but there are going to be very severe social consequences, right? You can't, like, start spitting. I mean, actually, people do that, but everyone looks at them in a very negative way, right? There are consequences. So you don't have that freedom. If you do, it's not total freedom because there's a penalty you have to pay to do it. Freedom of expression is somewhat broader than freedom of speech because expression doesn't just mean the words you use. It also means, like, the way you dress, it means the way you carry yourself, and so on. So there's more limits on this than there are on these things. But they can be very similar, okay? Generally also, when I was making these slides, I tried to include as many expressions as I could, just because these are things you're going to run into in debating. You're going to need to be aware of them and use them in your discussions. Sometimes there might be an important difference, sometimes there might not be an important difference. Either one could be the same. Okay? And then, aside from public and private space, there are what I call intermediate spaces. They're not totally public, but they're not totally private, and the rules are a little less clear. So, private space controlled by you, public spaces controlled by the community. Here are some examples of intermediate spaces. And let's just read the examples first, and then I actually have 3 questions. Maybe I should just give you the handout, even though it's going to give away some things in advance, because this is getting really annoying. Yeah. Maybe I should. Okay. So even if you know some things in advance, like if you can't resist the temptation to, like, flip ahead because the lecture is boring and you want to see what's coming next, don't do that. If you can, just follow along. But if you can't resist the temptation, well, that's okay. Just try to be more creative and add more thoughts to whatever is on the handout in addition. I'm still going to use the slides because I think that can focus us all together, but it's just becoming so distracting to have them keep going off. Okay, so where are we then? We're on page 2. So don't look at the answers, but just look at the second one on the top here. In fact, you could even fold it like this if you want to resist temptation. Just look at the top, the one next to the picture. It says intermediate spaces. And so what are some examples? First one, churches. Second, shopping malls, workplaces, newspapers, private clubs, published writing, like books or essays or something like that, right? These are all not totally private, even published writing, right? It's different in your own journal, your own notebook, your letter to your friend, that's private. But if it's published, it's not yours anymore, not totally yours. It's part of the public space. So, 3 questions then. Some of them are actually sort of double questions or triple questions even. First question, what is the community and who controls it? This is when you have to look down. Second one, what rights and freedoms apply to different types of intermediate spaces and who controls them? And third, how about e-spaces? Think about these examples, like messenger apps, Facebook pages, and news portals. Okay, so this is quite a lot to talk about. If you want to, instead of just 2, you can make a group of 4. That's also possible. Yeah, anyway, talk with at least your partner. If not with your partner, then 2 or 3 people, or 4 people. If you all want to talk together, that's fine. If you guys want to talk together, that's also fine. They have 3 already. They have 4. Yeah, you could do 3, 3. That's good. That's good. Okay. But you guys are all like way spread out, so I suggest like maybe one person move up or move back. Okay, everybody stop. So I don't know how many of these questions you got through, but I know everybody's had at least a few good thoughts about some of them, and that's sort of the point. Like, it's lecture, but it's not totally lecture. You need to have your own ideas in order to understand my ideas, right? That's the way lecture works best. And we were talking about the difference between some different kinds of intermediate space. I came up with a new word. I think intermediate might not be the right word. It's like mixed space. It mixes. These kinds of space are not totally public and they're not totally private. And so they mix the kinds of different freedoms and values that you have. And they mix the kinds of control that you have as well. So we looked at like your writing. And well, anyway, if you write something, and this actually happens sometimes, like you write something, and you mean this to be like a beautiful love poem. And then you publish it, and someone reads that poem, and then they use it to like justify being a neo-Nazi. You might be totally horrified at that, but you don't have control anymore. You don't, the idea of freedom of thought or freedom of conscience, like what it means to you, that doesn't exist anymore once that writing enters this kind of mixed space. It's still your writing. You have the freedom to express yourself and your freedom of speech about it, but you don't have freedom to control what people think about it, right? They also have their freedom of speech about it. So it's a very strange kind of mixed space. You might think your writing is very personal and it's private, even if you publish it, but it's not. It's no longer owned by you. I think a very good example of this, there's, in America, a cartoon character called Pepe the Frog. Anybody heard about that? You did? Explain.
I'm not sure how it came about, but I know it has become like a meme on the internet, like a meme for expressing like how you feel sorry about something.
No, that's not how you feel sorry about something. It's a meme expressing like support for the alt-right, for very right-wing, like neo-Nazi, basically. The cartoonist is like, I didn't ever want Pepe the Frog to be alt-right. I just wanted him to be social satire.
Why is he right?
Nobody can explain it. It's just, the point is, like, you don't have control of your personal things anymore once you're in public space. And so there's this bridge, there's this intermediate kind of space that's half personal, but it's not totally personal. It's very strange. If maybe I should just call up my browser and we can look at Pepe the Frog for a minute. It's not something I prepared, it just came to me as a result of our discussion. But oh, I don't have any internet here, of course, so that won't work. Anyway, somebody else who has internet, maybe you can show people Pepe the Frog, if you can get it on your browser. I wonder, will KiteNet work in my computer? Let's see. Yeah, Ion has Pepe. Go ahead, everybody just like walk over there and look if you want to. Maybe we should move to one of the other rooms, at least for after lunch. Okay, anyway. So Pepe the Frog, right? Like, look it up. It's an interesting example. Like, this is the kind of thing when you're preparing for a debate, and this is why I think prepared debates are actually a really good educational tool. Like, if you know the topic and you know like something about freedom of expression is coming up, or you know something about like copyright, authorship, any of those topics, and then you can like look this up, you can get more details, and it really can teach you something a lot about making better arguments. So that's actually something in this lecture. Like, I'm not covering any one topic in really great depth, but if any of these ideas interests you, like, do some research yourself. Type it in on the internet. Read it in Japanese, read it in Korean, but it can give you some interesting ideas. Debate, a lot of debate is about making differentiations between, like, in this case, in this debate, we're talking about this, we're not talking about that, right? So we're not talking about, like, say, your personal, right to write whatever you want in your diary, because that's personal, it's personal space, nobody can control it. We're talking about the right to regulate what you publish. What you publish is not personal anymore. People can take that, they can use it however they want, therefore it's something that's part of public space as well. It's part of the community, therefore the community has the right to regulate it as well, right? That's the kind of argument you have to make in a debate. Churches, very interesting, right? Because churches are like a kind of private space, but they're a private space for a group. A group of people who all think the same way. I think you guys were talking about that, right? And let's see if I can find your names on the list. Let's see. I guess it must be like you're Miyu and you're Chiho. Yeah, Miyu and Chiho were talking about that. About how in the church it's like a public space in some ways because you're with a group of people, but unlike big public space, you don't have a right to freedom of expression. You don't have a right to freedom of speech because there are these agreed upon ideas. It's more like a private space where everybody's already made the same decision about what they should think. So the whole idea of freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, yes, but it's not your own freedom. It's like a kind of group freedom to think and do what you want in your church as a group. And so each one of these spaces, they have some public aspect and they have some private aspect, but you have to actually analyze very specifically which aspect is actually applying in this case. And if you're doing a debate, then you have to analyze why does it either support the government side or the opposition side in that debate. Okay, e-spaces. Did anybody get to question 3? Anybody in your discussion? Nobody? All right, take 2 more minutes, and then I'll just ask a volunteer to just tell us something interesting about what you discussed about question 3. And then I'll go to my next slide and like the thoughts I had while I was preparing my lecture. So, how about it? What rights and freedoms apply to different types of e-spaces? So just like you were talking about the church or the workplace or a private club, talk about the messenger apps. What kind of rights and freedoms do you have if you're sending messages on a messenger? Or what kind of rights and freedoms do you have if you're typing something on Facebook or looking at something on Facebook? Okay? Okay, so yeah. Okay, everybody stop. All right. Mizuki and Yoshifumi and Daddy, did your group come up with something interesting? Yes, okay, excellent. Tell us.
And in e-spaces, the rights and freedom are guaranteed like public space because if, for example, imagine the Facebook pages, there are, if you post something, it can be seen by many people. So that is why the rights and freedoms are guaranteed like public spaces. On the other hand, so that is why the surrounding people controls the e-spaces. I think so.
Okay. Oh, that's a good thought. All right. Anybody have anything you want to say about that? Or even ask him a question? Go ahead. But you should probably stand up because like you have to project to the whole class. So.
So I have a question.
And turn sideways so your voice goes that way.
For the messenger apps, because it's the like kind of communication between the individuals, so I think we have like full right to say anything about anything. So for example, I can say, "Hera, I don't like you." It doesn't make any problem. It's just a problem between two of us. But I have a question about like difference between the Facebook pages and news portals, because I think the for the news portals, they have a duty to say the information based on the like fact, like objective fact. But for the Facebook pages, I'm questioning that like should we always like do we have right to spread the wrong information? For example, like if some kind of accident happens and if I like if I report to these Facebook pages that I have a very important information, and then these Facebook pages just upload what I reported them, then lots of people see this, so it can harm the society and may affect in a negative way. So I'm questioning that should Facebook pages always have responsibility to say like the fact, not the wrong information. Yeah. That was my question.
Okay. Well, that's, how would you answer that, Daddy?
For Facebook pages, maybe the Facebook owner enforce some policies such as that discrimination is prohibited or something like that. However, the power of enforcement is very little because there are many things in Facebook. So even it is some prohibited things, but we can post what we want to say, and if this is a problem for someone, the people who post it sometimes are scolded or interfered by these spaces. I think so.
So yeah, based on your original comment, you talked about the public and it's public space and the public should control what goes on it. But you added, there's also, it has a double character, right? There's a private owner, Mark Zuckerberg. He's the owner and the CEO. So what he wants, it's partly his private space and it's partly public space, and it's both. That's why Facebook right now is a big area of contention. Like, how should we treat Facebook? What kind of standards, what kind of norms should apply to Facebook? Because it's a little of both. And it has a lot of different functions as well. Like, if you send a message on Facebook to somebody, is that the same as sending a message on a messenger app? Maybe. Or maybe not, right? But that's the question. If you post something openly on Facebook, is it the same? So I think that's the question, right? I think because e-space, unlike physical space, is new and it's changing a lot, it's not clear what the rules are all the time. And I think I should add something else. Like, even in traditional public space, like the very, very traditional, the Agora of Athens, right? The central forum of a participatory democracy. Or the marketplace of a small village where all the people in the village come together on market day to do their shopping and they know each other, right? Like Adam Smith's model for the free market with the invisible hand, right? Even in those like most democratic of spaces, there's still not an absolute idea of what the rules should be. Like, you have freedom of expression, you have freedom of speech, but you also have some standards you have to follow, right? You don't have total freedom of expression or total freedom of speech ever. On your own, you do have freedom of action, but maybe still you don't even have total freedom of action, right? Like there are some things that maybe your society says you can't do, like commit suicide or something like that. So there's nothing that's absolute, nothing that's total, but there are general standards. So generally, I think the feeling is sort of like what Daddy said, that Facebook is a public space now. But it's a little bit unclear how that's supposed to work since it's a private company with a private owner. Does that private company then have the same kind of obligation that a national government would have, or that a city government would have, to serve the public of that country or that city? It's also international. So even if it has the same obligation as a city government or a national government, which nation, which city, which culture? So all those are really interesting questions. Here are some thoughts that I had. Some key points. I think I have 2 pages of them. I can't remember, but we can read together. It's also on the next slide, the one I told you to, like, don't look in advance because it'll control your thought too much, right? But maybe it'll connect with some of the things you were thinking. So let's read this one about key points. The first question is, what is community and who controls that? And my first thought, maybe I'll just read to you. But, well, do you want to read together? Sure, let's read together. Everybody ready? Go. The community is made up of its members. They control it by consensus. The largest community is the governing state as a whole, which is indirectly controlled by its citizens through representative democracy. Social contract theory says we should abide by the state's rules because we are indirectly responsible for them ourselves and because we benefit from them. That's called reciprocity. Democratic theory says that when those conditions don't apply, we should have a revolution, or at least change the rules, which is exactly what Hung was saying, and Hung was saying. And then second point, sort of following on that, is because communities operate by consensus, social contract theory also says that individual rights and other freedoms must and will be limited if they harm other members of the community. That is, create third-party harm, which is called the harm principle. So those are important debating terms to know. And you should know not just, oh, if it's third-party harm, you can't do it. I mean, I think a lot of debating analysis is just at that level. Oh, but it causes harm, you can't do it, right? That's too simplistic. Why can't you do it? Because those people it's causing harm to are members of your community, because you and they work together to make the rule in the first place. If you break that rule, you're violating your reciprocal obligation to them to work together to make the rules and keep the rules that are mutually benefiting all of you, right? So yeah, that's how you use it in your debates, right? You want to add anything? Did I miss anything, or is it? It's about the same as what you were saying, right? So yeah, if you make that level of analysis, that becomes a very strong argument. But it has to be public space for this to work. It can't be something private, because in private space, you don't have that obligation to other people, right? So in a debate where you're arguing about like what kind of space is this, first you have to show that it's public space, and that it must be public space. Like Facebook must be public space because everybody in the world comes together and use it. Everybody can see your post. Even if it's a post you send to a friend, the friend might quote it, or might copy it to somebody, right? Therefore, you can't really treat Facebook like private space. Therefore. Yeah.
So how about like if the government can like violate like even like the individual private space in the first place? I mean, like it's not like about like the right of people, but like the private information of them. Like, you know, like in like the semi-final rookie like yesterday,
yeah,
about like the all like employments and salaries informations of like employees. So
right.
like that's actually like the private space, or even like for the company that.
Well, is it private space? That's the question.
So like how, like to some extent, why we can like violate like other private space?
Well, if you can establish that it is private space and it should be private space because there's no mutual like negotiation involved with those rules, or that there shouldn't be, then it follows, right? It's like a syllogism. Like all private space, or the private space can never be violated by the government, right? This is private space. Therefore, this can never be violated by the government. But you have to prove those the premises first before you can get to the conclusion. You have to prove first that it is private space. And then second, or first you have to prove that private space can't be violated. But that's, yeah, like at the fundamental level, your most private space, I guess, is your thought, right? And so far, we don't have any way of reading people's thoughts. Although that's also sort of a totally not something I even thought of for this presentation, but it's a bit scary, right? They say that like a computer that looks at 50 of your Facebook posts or 50 of your Facebook's likes can predict how you will respond to a personal question better than your wife or your husband. So in a way, it's almost reading your thoughts based on your behaviors, but it's still not actually going inside. I mean, I think that's just a generalized case. It can predict better than your wife or your husband, but that just means it can predict like, 70% of the time. And it doesn't involve your most private or secret or creative thoughts, I think. So it's a little bit different case. But anyway, like, obviously there's some kind of private space that even under the most absolute dictatorship or the most, totally like communitarian system, which doesn't even give people much private space. Like, say, think about like North Korea or China or something where even the idea of privacy isn't that strongly felt. But they still can't go in and read your mind. Like, the Chinese government doesn't care what you think in your mind, as long as you don't write it, But you can't even write it on your blog, because like any kind of electronic communication in China is considered public space, right? You can't even say it necessarily. Like in North Korea, I think, you're not even supposed to say it to your friend. Your friend's supposed to report you to the government, right? So the kind of personal communication, like a letter or something, they don't have the assumption that that's private space. So it really depends. Like salaries, are they private space? And then should they be private space? Like we would say that a personal letter should be private space. It shouldn't be your friend should report you. Like we would consider that a huge betrayal. We would say your friend should have more duty to you than to the state. But what about a salary information then? So it's possible if you can argue that that should not be private space, then the whole syllogism can fall. So it's not an absolute win for like the opposition side in that case. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so you mean that like in like the debate, like when like the principle is about the privacy of like individual, and like instead of like arguing about like how or like why the government can like violate that kind of privacy, we should debate like if this privacy is like truly privacy of that individual.
Right, exactly. Like I would argue on the government side in that debate, like, the money is not a private thing. Like money is not an ideology, money is not something that applies only to you. Money is just like a system. It's a token of how much, economic power you have. But economic power is something very important for the public to regulate, and for it to regulate and distribute equally. Therefore, it should be in the public space. Something like that. Okay, so anyway, that's the basic, like, sort of why the community does control public space and can control public space. Second point is what rights and freedoms apply to different types of intermediate spaces and who controls them. And this is not complete at all, but it's some of my basic thoughts and outlines on this second point. So let's read that one together also. So the first set is like churches and private clubs. I sort of put those together because I think they're pretty similar, although I'm sure there are some differences. So those on the right side, ready? Everybody ready? Go. Closely controlled by the members, norms, freedoms, and rights are specifically defined. And that applies to private and public rights because they share both private and public characteristics. But what you can and can't do in your club or in your church, usually there are written rules, right? You can, if you walk into a church, you see like a list of rules, like remove your hat and don't talk loudly. And same thing in a private club, right? Like you could only enter this club if you're wearing a jacket and a tie or something like that, right? Or instead of intermediate spaces, like you can call them mixed spaces because they mix the characteristics. The second one, workplaces. And workplaces is because there are lots of kinds of workplaces. They're really hard to define. Also, sort of shopping malls and workplaces in some ways are similar and in some ways are different. The next set of four is all sort of like a long continuum rather than separate categories, really. And then newspapers and published writing. So let's read that comment too. Are you ready? Go. Closely controlled by the owners if they are small businesses. Large companies and shopping malls tend to take on some characteristics of community public space and be partly regulated by the state. Newspapers and published writing are treated more as individual space, but we already talked about exceptions, right? They're individual space, but like what people do with them, that kind of freedom of action or freedom of thought or conscience, like you can't control those anymore once they're in public space. So yeah. So that's why like newspapers and your published writing generally, you know, there aren't very many restrictions on what you can say or do in the writing or in the newspaper, but in some cases, if you can clearly demonstrate that there's going to be a harm to the community, like they may censor things, right? There may be, that was one of the motions, in fact, like in times of crisis, governments should censor like secret information, right? Or harmful information, you know, they should make a rule. The newspaper can't publish this, you know, the department that's usually would put it in a report can't put it in the report, like those kinds of things, right? So in that case, right, it's more individual, but it's not totally individual. And newspapers especially, I think Day1 said, you tend to think that they have a duty to represent sort of the public as a whole, at least traditional news, traditional media. But then what about like individual like blogging sites or gossip sites or so on? Like in eSpace, the whole idea of what is a newspaper or what is news media is also very unclear. So. Okay, ready to go on? Yes, good, okay. We haven't had too many problems yet for a while. This is good. Maybe just like turning it off and turning it on helped. Okay, anyway, third question then is how about eSpaces? So think about these examples. So all together, are you ready? eSpaces tend to be treated as extensions of their closest physical world analogs. But they don't match those analogs perfectly. This is where questions arise of how we should regulate them. So messenger apps are treated like personal letters, private space, but messengers have group chat functions. So are they more like private clubs, where they should have specific rules? Okay, and if so, how are the rules set? News portals are treated much like newspapers, but they have international reach, so who regulates them as public space? The closest analogy to Facebook pages, even personal pages, seems to be the public marketplace, the agora. But Facebook is also a private company. It's a hybrid of public and private where rules and norms are still being created, which is what like Daddy and Day1 were talking about too. So yeah. And you know, I don't have answers. I mean, I have my personal feelings about what I would prefer or not prefer, but I don't think anybody can tell you like these are the answers for exactly how we should regulate or treat these things. From country to country, from person to person, your preferred answer might vary a bit. So anyway, moving on then, let's go to this is the general theory then, like what's public, what's private, how do we regulate it, why do we regulate it that way? Is there a personal control, is there community control? Those are the big questions. And what community is it that's controlling it, right? Or what individual person is it that's controlling it? 4 motions. So generally 3 topics, but they also blend into each other. Like depending on how you want to define or set the motion, right? It can always relate to more than one topic, I think. But anyway. So first motion, this is the one for the international friendship debate tomorrow. The 4 debaters from Day plus Tatsuko and wait, I should check. I was going to check who is your partner. And let me see who the debaters. Tatsuko and Takeo Yamaguchi is supposed to be your partner. Is he here? I don't think he's here, right? Takeo. He's not here?
I made a mistake.
Oh, who?
Yamaguchi.
Oh, okay. Okay. So Yuki, you'll be Tatsuhira's partner. Okay. Okay, right. So right. That's the first motion anyway. This house would require networking programs and apps to allow backdoor access to law enforcement. And Tatsuro, it's almost the same as the one for the policy debate. So you already have a lot of expertise, right? And then the second team will be from Day. It will be Hongyoung and Jiwon. And then the third team will be, oh, he's not here either, but Yoshi Okamoto and Ayang. And then the fourth team will be Hunkak and Hera. So that's the one you'll have to debate. Everybody else, we'll talk about it a little bit today, but you don't actually have to debate that one. But we'll talk about it during this lecture. And then the 4 teams that are preparing for this motion, you'll have a chance to think a lot more about what you want to say about it. Second motion is this house would make it illegal to publish leaked official documents without authorization from the agencies involved. That's actually very similar to the Kyushu open motion, except it just added in times of crisis. It's not about leaks, it's also about the government itself, but it's somewhat similar. It's about revealing government information to the public. Is the government itself public space? The government is sort of a representation of the public, right? It's an incarnation of the public in sort of representative form, and yet is it the same as the public? No, so that's the question, right? In some ways, government is also an intermediate space or a mixed space. Government is like a private space because the individual government officials have not only the freedom but the obligation to follow their conscience and do what they think is best and right. But at the same time, it's like a public space where it has to follow the public opinion because it's supposed to represent the consensus of the public, right? So there's some tension between those two roles. Third, this house would require SNS websites to assign publicly available rankings to their users based on the quality and reliability of the users' contributions. So that means if you're posting like Junghera is a dummy on public sites, you would get a bad ranking because you don't seem very reliable. But if Hera is publishing link to this New York Times article. It gives you in-depth analysis of the North Korean situation. Here's the link. And then, oh, that seems very reliable. She gets a higher ranking. And last, cyberbullying and online safety is the general topic. And the motion, this House believes websites administrators should actively block posts with offensive, defamatory, or threatening content. So that also it's somewhat connected with this one, which is somewhat connected with this one about what information we do and don't allow, which is somewhat connected with the first one, right? Like whether law enforcement can be monitoring and double checking it or not. First motion then. This House would require networking programs and apps to allow backdoor access to law enforcement. Start building a case with your partner or with your group. So first thing that you should do, my framework for building a case is really just a very simple framework, but I think in 15 minutes in BP you don't have a chance to think about all the 25 different steps and stakeholders anyway, so it's better to be simple. What's the problem that led to this motion being proposed? How does the motion solve the problem? What terms or concepts need defining or modeling, and what end goals could each side of the debate have? What arguments can you make to support those goals? That's pretty much how you make a case, right? So with your partner or your group, go ahead and talk about that. You might not finish all 3 questions. You might not even get to question 3 by the time I say stop. That's okay. I just want you to be thinking about the motion and what you think the motion should deal with. Generally what problems and what kind of ideas. Yes? Okay, backdoor access. That means if a program has some security feature, like I want to make this message private, it means that the law enforcement agency can go in the back door, disable that feature, and read what you're saying. So like Kakao Talk in Korea, right? It's really supposed to be private, nobody can read it, but there's a law that says the Korean government can get access to your messages. The company has to give them access to all those messages if the government wants it. Okay? Like that. Some applications don't do that. In fact, some applications, the company itself can't get access. They have the way the program is written. It encodes your message secretly, It encrypts your message, right, using some kind of really complex mathematical formula that would take a computer like 10 years just to decode, right? And even the company itself can't read your message, even if they wanted to. WhatsApp and Telegram are the two most famous ones for that. And other ones we don't know, like what is it, China, WeChat? Like, nobody knows. My guess is maybe the Chinese government has a way of going in the back door and finding out, but I don't know. Okay? So, all right, any other questions about the words of the motion? Okay, great, go ahead, with your partner or with your group. Talk a little bit about what's the problem, how does the motion solve the problem? So you actually get to see how this debate works tomorrow. But this is just like a basic framing of the problem solution, right? This is how you should begin a prime minister speech, essentially. It's not the most eloquent way, because I was fitting it on a slide and I was trying to make it fit like exactly the kind of topic of this lecture. But this is basically how a prime minister speech could begin. You could begin more colorfully. You could tell a story about something that happened to somebody and then say what the story means. Or you could use a little more flowery rhetoric or something if you wanted to. But this is basically how you would set up a beginning of a debate. So let's read together. And I think most people were thinking about the same framework, at least the two groups I was talking with. So problem solution here. Everybody ready? Let's go. Criminal cartels and terrorist groups are using networking programs and apps, especially secure communication apps, to coordinate their crimes. Unlike in the past, when communication in the physical world was relatively easy to monitor by law enforcement agencies, if they knew who to watch, now communication takes place secretly, electronically, and instantaneously, giving a huge advantage to the criminals and placing both the security of the state and the safety of individual people in danger. By passing this motion, we can restore the balance and allow law enforcement to do its job. So that would be how you would set it up. And then you would move from there probably to a definition specifically of what you would do and what you mean by law enforcement and under what circumstances. And if you were worried about law enforcement having too much power, you would probably do a preemptive rebuttal and say, opposition will argue that we shouldn't put so much power into the hands of law enforcement, which we know can be prejudiced against minorities, which we know can be prejudiced in favor of the party in power and work to a disadvantage of democracy. But we have checks and balances in our model, and then you can explain that, right? So, but anyway, this is how you would begin. So I don't know in the actual debate tomorrow what the opening government will do, but you were saying I want to be opening government? It's going to be randomly drawn at probably after lunch. Or maybe before lunch. Where is lunch? The cafeteria? Probably, although it's up to you. The cafeteria is the cheapest and most delicious option for your money, I would say. Okay, and it's open today. Anybody with a question about this? So I'm not going to answer all those other questions. I'm not going to tell you like what a complete case would be for government or opposition. I don't think anybody had time to make a complete case. You just probably thought of some arguments. That's fine. But I will make a list of some of the other things I think that the teams in this debate should think about. And if you're going to just watch the debate, you can think about these things too. And if you're interested in the topic, you can do more research and find out about them. So here's the first list. It's what do criminal cartels and terrorists actually do? When you're making your arguments, you have to connect them to a real case. You can't just say, well, oh, they're using it to their advantage. They have so much power, the criminal cartel, the drug cartel in Mexico, or the terrorists in Syria, or whatever, right? You have to be more specific. So what do they actually do? Okay, most important thing, right? They use encrypted communication like WhatsApp or Telegram. So that means that even if you can find out who's sending the message and you can get the message, it just looks like a bunch of numbers and you don't know what it says. So if you want to know like when they're going to meet, or what kind of action they're planning to do, or when they're going to do it, like you don't know those things because it's in code, it's encrypted. So that's the first thing they do. Second thing they have, this is actually some of them, right? You'll see with the different points. Some of them have hierarchical networks, especially criminal cartels. There's usually like a big boss and then workers under the boss and then workers under those workers and so on. Some terror networks are Al-Qaeda, right? I can't even remember the guy's name. Osama bin Laden, right, was the leader of Al-Qaeda until they killed him. And then IS, Zawahiri or something, I can't remember the guy's name who was in charge of IS. But now, like, those people are dead. So they also have non-hierarchical networks, right? More and more. So there are things like copycat attacks and crimes where somebody sees in the paper, like this guy like drove his car into the crowd and killed people, and then somebody else says, oh, that was so cool, I'm going to drive my car and kill people. We see that happening right now, in fact. We have homegrown terrorists, people who are not connected to any network, but they just think that those ideas are good, or they think those ideas are interesting, or they're just angry about some kind of thing because they hate some kind of person, or because they have a personal grudge. They hate women because like their mother abused them and they were rejected by their girlfriend, or they hate like immigrants because they think their immigrant is taking away their job or whatever, right? You have lone wolf, sometimes they call it, where just one person decides to act by themselves. And then IS itself has sort of shifted from a hierarchical organized group to just a brand. It's like, oh, IS, everybody, if they hear that name IS, they're going to be afraid of me. So some people say, like, I like IS, and then they stab somebody or something, but they probably don't have any connection to anybody else in IS. It's just they're like a lone wolf. I think some of the knife attacks that you saw in Britain were people were saying like, Allah Akbar, right? Allah, God is great. And then long live IS, and they would stab somebody, but they actually had no history of any connection to IS ever. It's just something they said to try and make people afraid while they were doing it. So that's also, there are two kinds of terrorist groups. When you're making a debate, like you should be talking a little bit about that difference, I think. And then terrorists may immigrate and infiltrate into societies that they see as hostile and that they wish to attack. Especially now where IS is losing its territory, they're actually actively sending people out and telling them like, oh, just immigrate and hide for a while and then try to start up more terror. Criminal cartels are international, usually, but they also have members who are citizens in the countries already. So there's a difference also between how you would treat a citizen and how you would treat a foreigner, right? And that might be important in this debate. And then question, which of these points would you bring up in government arguments? Which of these points would you bring up in opposition arguments? I'm not going to have you answer that because we don't have a lot of time. But I'm just saying these are some things that those teams should be thinking about. The rest of you guys should be thinking about these things too. Makes a difference. Okay? Next group, what do law enforcement and governments do? So first of all, they collect metadata on electronic communications. Metadata is not the actual text of the communication or the words. It's just like the time, the length of time, the origin, and the ending point. But if they see a pattern, like, there's always like a 2-minute communication at like 3 p.m. from this room to Raqqa in Syria, they think, maybe somebody in this room is communicating with IS. And then they start spying on that person. That's what metadata is. In some countries, the law enforcement does not even need permission to collect that data. In other countries, they need permission. They need a special court to like sign on the warrant and say it's okay for you to collect that data. They can monitor specific communications. If it's not encrypted, if it's not coded, then they can actually read what you're writing. They can try to break encryption with algorithms and devices, but that's really hard. There was one case, they found an iPhone in somebody in California who committed a terrorist attack, and they tried to make Apple like help them crack the iPhone like protection code, and Apple said, we're not going to do it. Like, we can't even do it anyway, even if we wanted to help you, and they like delayed, and then they made they hired some Israeli security firm, and the Israeli security firm was actually able to unlock the phone for them. But it took a long time. It took a couple of months, I think. And then they can collect traditional, that is human intelligence from informants. They can like say, you know, oh, they can offer a bribe or a reward, or they can try to convert somebody who's in the group, the criminal group, like the drug group or the terrorist group, and say, please, you know, just like tell us, inform us the secrets. They can investigate crimes. They can make arrests, they can punish people, which punishment is usually considered a deterrent. But again, depending on what kind of group you're talking about, it may be more or less of a deterrent. They can infiltrate and disrupt the organizations. They can actually send their own like spies into the group and then like try to make trouble inside the group. They can do community outreach, education, and or development efforts to try to reduce motivation to be a criminal or reduce motivation to be a terrorist. They can get or not get prior authorization or warrants for these activities from the courts and from higher levels of government. So it really depends on which country and which security agency you're talking about. Whether they need permission and who can give them permission or who can't give them permission, or whether they can just do it anytime they want. It really depends. So though, anyway, which of these types of activities or ideas would you bring up on government or opposition? And last, other important stakeholders and issues. Just sort of a general collection of other things that I didn't mention already. So let's just read these all together. Everybody ready? Are you ready? Go, first one. And stop. And second one. And stop. And we know the answer to that. They're intermediate in some ways, but in which ways and which ways are important, right? It's not just are they or aren't they, right? You can't just say, oh, it's intermediate space, therefore, you know, it's not private. You have to explain why and how, right? Third one, fourth one. What effects? Right. The companies themselves are also stakeholders. And next one. Right. So they're also stakeholders, right? And there may be other things I didn't even think of that maybe you thought of. So that's something you can think about too. Okay. Anybody want to stop me, or should I just keep going? No? Okay. So like, yeah, sometimes like this may be a lot and really fast, but that's okay. The goal is to make you motivated to learn more and find out more yourself. And I'm trying to give you some time to talk so you can also have a chance to think a little bit on your own, but introduction stuff. And then in the debates later, you'll have a chance to actually try and make your cases and your arguments about these things. Okay, next motion is this house would right. And this was similar to the Kyushu debate open motion in some ways. Anyway, the idea of like government information being revealed to the public is the same basic core concept. But this is very different in terms of who the stakeholders are and what the circumstances are. So think briefly, same thing. What's the problem? How does the motion solve the problem? What terms need defining? What goals and what arguments can you think of like in 3 or 4 minutes? Not even the same amount of time for making a VP case, but just to get a general feeling. Go ahead. If it fits. It might not fit. Different motion. Okay, everybody stop. So here's my problem solution statement. It's somewhat similar to the case that Kota and I read, but not the same. Okay, everybody ready? Let's read together. Go. With digital storage of information, universal internet access, and a 24-hour news cycle, it has become extremely easy to leak government documents. The problem is that governments are finding it increasingly difficult to conduct business without constant public pressure and scrutiny. While this might seem like a good thing in theory, in fact, when every interoffice memo or snarky email by a government employee gets leaked to the public and is magnified by a sensationalized media, this means that government offices can't even get their jobs done, but instead have to waste valuable time and effort just reassuring people that there is no crisis. Because the media is not taking responsibility itself to ignore these illegal leaks, we need to take action and not just punish the leaker if we can find him or her, but also the media that irresponsibly publishes the leaked documents. Similar to your case also? Yeah. Somewhat similar, right? But the media as an actor and the fact that there's a specific leaker means that the incentives and the responsibilities are very different from the Kyushu debate open motion where the government was the actor and the public itself was the other actor. Here we have two different intermediaries between the government and the public. So all the arguments in the Kyushu debate open motion perhaps are still valid, but there's also a lot of extra nuance in this particular motion.
Actually, like the OG in my rooms, like they somehow managed like to input like the media case inside this, like the internal director, so that's why they got first in this round.
We were CG and we put media in. One judge said we should be second. The other judge said no. The other judge was the chair. So anyway, yeah, but that's the way you frame the case. So again, the beginning of your speech should be something like this, and then you can add the nuance later in your arguments. You can add like things about public space, about the duties of media as a public officer, how they are not just like have private duty to take care of their own interest or their own conscience, but they have a public duty to reinforce what the government thinks is necessary and so on, right? Like these kinds of arguments. Okay, so two more motions. They get much quicker after this because I didn't even have time to do all this preparation because I like ran from 3 weeks in Italy to Kyushu debate open to now. Most of my preparation was, well, I did a lot of reading while I was in Italy, but the actual preparation for these slides was between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. this morning. So anyway, here are some key terms if you're going to argue about this motion. So words you should know, things you should think about. If you are interested and you want to do more research, these are things you can look up on Google or on Naver or on whatever your favorite search site is. Transparency, reportorial privilege, which means that traditionally newspapers have the privilege, meaning they're exempt from any prosecution, even if they report things which themselves are illegal. So whistleblowers, because some of that information, whistleblower means you're revealing information that is a crime, that the government itself is committing a crime, but a lot of the leaks don't have anything to do with crimes, they're just sort of information of various kinds. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange are just names you should know because WikiLeaks is the longest running and biggest website for reporting this kind of information. But sometimes the leakers, like Edward Snowden, right, he revealed his leaks, not to WikiLeaks, but to The Guardian and to the German magazine called Bild. So it's not always to WikiLeaks. It's not always like a non-traditional like electronic source that gets this information. Sometimes it's a traditional media source as well. State secrets or trade secrets, if you're talking about a company leak, it's a little different, but those are words you should know. Traditional and mainstream media, how that's different from new media or specialized sites like WikiLeaks. Gatekeeping, if you don't know that word, it's good to know about in debating because traditional media has a role to be like the guardian at the gate, to show people what is and isn't important, to be the public conscience. So if they think there's bad information or useless information or fake news, traditionally you say the news media should block that, should just not talk about it if they think it's useless or not helpful. But if it's something people do need to know, then they should try extra hard to report it. And they should follow up. So if there's somebody leaks information about a crime that the government did, like the government stole money from people or forced people to move out of an area for construction when the construction company had an illegal permit, but the government went ahead and the police pushed the people out, and somebody leaks that, the news media should not just reveal, but also should report extra detail. But if it's something like an email that one secretary sent to another secretary criticizing the president, and it's just gossip, the news media should just not even report it. That's what gatekeeping is. Fact-checking, similar to gatekeeping, slightly more specific, and fake news. That's a big topic today, right? So, yeah, okay, that's just a list. Okay, 2 more motions, and we don't really have much time before lunch, so I'll just run through very quickly on those. Oh, actually, there's a little video. We'll be a little late for lunch, but we're flexible, so we'll be late coming back and just slightly behind schedule on things, that's all. So about censorship and social control, what's the motion? This house? So publicly available rankings, it means sort of like this, like Kota Jodoi and Daiki Morita and 33 other people liked, I think it was a post that Hung made, actually, Hung Kak. Me? Yeah. But I didn't reveal your private information. But is it private? I don't know. It's public, but it's private, but it's both. Okay. But I just put how many likes. 33. That's sort of a rating, right? There's competition in Facebook for how many likes you can get. Some people think that's really important. Other people don't care, but yeah. Plus this, right? This is just a gaming website that I go to because I like playing strategy games, but it's like a war game but anyway, so this person, Plasma Crab, has the rank of captain, but Mapo only has the rank of private. So sometimes based on how many contributions you make or how many times people like you, they give you a ranking system of number of stars or levels inside your website. So that's sort of what this is about. I'm not sure if I have sound. If I have sound, there's a video here, and I'll have to sort of see whether that works. But anyway, this is a very extreme example of what this motion calls for. Anybody know what this is? Sesame Credit? It's like Alibaba, the Chinese site. They give you a ranking. This one is, I forget how many points. 729 points, right? It's a kind of credit. It's a high ranking for this particular user. If we get sound, I will play you. Oh, I don't have internet. Wait. My problem. Okay, well, we're out of time anyway. Trust me, if you go to this link, if you get the slides, or I should actually even just write the link on the board. This is a really interesting video. I'll summarize. But it presents it in a really dynamic way, and it discusses it very well. It's like a 7-minute video. So you get credit on Alibaba if you do socially positive things. So I was using the example, if Jiwon is typing all these kinds of nasty comments, she gets bad credit. Her score goes down. If you type socially productive things, if you, in China, if you praise the Communist Party, you get extra points. If you buy useful items, like rice grown in China, you get extra points. If you import expensive sunglasses from the USA, you get less points. But this is the bad part. This is the really, so it's gaming. It's changing the idea of cooperating with the government or with the society into a kind of game where you get more points if you cooperate more and less points if you don't cooperate. And you can compare everybody's score. Oh, I'm a 729. What about you? 303. Right? Anyway, But in this system in China, there's an extra element where if your friends have low ranking, it lowers your ranking. And if your friends have high ranking, it raises your ranking. So it's an incentive to put pressure on your friends to do what the government wants. Because you can raise your own ranking if you raise your friend's ranking. Or it's an incentive to isolate the people who are not cooperating with the government. And by 2020, the government says that this is going to be a national system. They're going to decide. Alibaba and WeChat and several other sites each have their own test system. But by 2020, their plan is to make this a national rating for everybody. So it's very scary, actually. But you can think like Facebook or some other thing, maybe like people who post a lot of fake news, shouldn't there be a kind of penalty? Do you want to censor them, or do you want to just like warn people that maybe this person is not posting good posts or something? Like that's what this motion is about. So right, we can't see the website, and no time for this, but basically, like I would be talking about the problem of fake news, the problem about trolls. Trolls are people who make bad posts just because they want a lot of people to read them, they want attention. The idea that Facebook is a public forum or other sites, big sites like this are a public forum, so they should follow some kind of public rules and work for the public good. And therefore, this rating system is a way of like sort of helping people check and self-enforce. Like, oh, if it's got a low rating, I probably shouldn't trust the posts from this person because that person posts a lot of fake news, or that person makes a lot of nasty comments, uses a lot of curse words. If this person has a high rating, maybe it's worth reading, maybe I should click on that one, like that kind of thing. That's what this one is about. And then keywords, fake news, trolls and trolling, bots. Bots are like automatic computers that keep reposting the same fake news or something like that. Spam, obviously it's useless stuff that nobody wants, but it keeps coming to get you. Game theory means like gaming, meaning like this whole system of giving people points, making them want to achieve certain goals. Positional value, the idea that there's an intrinsic psychological value that has been shown by research that people want to feel that they're superior to others, and so that even if something has no actual value at all, that positional value is worth something. People will make sacrifices to get that. Skinnerian conditioning. B.F. Skinner is a psychologist. He like, shocked rats, and if you get shocked, you stop doing something, and if you get rewarded, like you get food, you do something more. So the idea of repeated rewards for doing something, it's going to mean, oh, I get another extra point every time I do this. Every time I click on the government website, I get a point. Oh, I'll just click some more. Right? Social engineering means it's like privatization of state functions. So instead of having the state be in charge of trying to make people do productive things, it privatizes that. It makes like individual sites or individual people responsible for policing themselves, rather than having like the police or the law enforcement or the communication commission make sure that people are publishing good news. It just tries to make people be self-enforcing. So that's a trend these days. Like states, as the world gets more complex, a lot of things are being privatized. Or make Mark Zuckerberg in Facebook, like make him responsible for deleting the content. That kind of thing. Privatization of a state function, rather than having the government make some kind of rule about what you publish or not publish. And then this one is somewhat similar. This house believes website administrators should actively block posts with offensive, defamatory, or threatening comments. So it's also about privatizing the government function. Instead of the government like policing people or arresting people if they defame people, or having the court system, you have a lawsuit, it's like having the private company try to stop that from happening instead. So there's a big question about whether that's right or wrong, right? If it's a public goal or public moral, is it fair? Is it going to be done fairly? Can it be done fairly if you're having the private company enforce it, or if you're having different people enforce it in different ways? Problem solution. The problem, like we have radicalization, we have gateway sites, we have legitimization and normalization of bad behavior, of offensive comments, and it's destroying the agora, destroying the public forum where we can all come together in a safe and peaceful way. And Oh, this is what some of these sites actually say. Like, do you know what this reference is? Conservatives are losing their minds over Charlottesville. What's the reference to Charlottesville?
The white supremacists in Charlottesville in the U.S.
Right.
Like some kind of like violence. Like
Right, violence by white supremacists. They had a rally called Unite the Right, which was like anti-immigrants and anti-non-white. And then there were some people who were protesting against them in another rally, and one of the white supremacists, like neo-Nazis, drove the car and crashed into the other people and killed one. So the Charlottesville incident, and then it was even more of a controversy because Donald Trump didn't condemn it. He just said, oh, both sides should be peaceful. He didn't say it's wrong to kill somebody. So, but this columnist on this site, this is like altright.com, says, oh, are we Nazis or are we just proud white men? Nazis obviously bad, proud white men, good. So anyway, I don't know if you should be proud of killing people, probably not. Anyway, and here, Discord shuts down alt-right server. But this is interesting because some web hosting sites after this event actually shut down sites from the alt-right, from the white supremacists. So there's actually censorship going on, privatization of censorship, where companies are actually saying, oh, we don't want these people on our company because it's going to give us a bad reputation. So is that right or wrong? But then the comment they make is really offensive here. It's like, says, the pathetic nerd cucks at Discord have caved and joined the war against free speech. So they're using insults to try and condemn the person that's like against them. So anyway, this is what I see as the problem that we have in status quo, where these public spaces are not civil spaces. In an actual public space where we see each other and see each other's reactions and actually live together in a classic traditional public space, we have to care about how we react. But online, it's such a big and impersonal space, like people just start talking trash all the time. And then that becomes a gateway for other people to get more radically like antagonistic and to normalize the idea of being offensive and violent and so on. And so I see that as the problem. And then the solution, or one solution, I don't know if personally I support it, but it's in this motion, one solution would be to make the websites ban that kind of discussion. Or even to shut down sites that do that. So anyway, and so here are some key terms, safe spaces and triggers. Safe space means a space where people can know that they will not be offended if they go there. They can see things on that space and know that no one will be insulting them. Triggers, things that make, special things that make people feel offended or hurt or angry. You know, like if you call women bitches, like for some women that's extremely offensive, you shouldn't do that. Or, I don't know, if you call like Japanese Japs or something, I don't know if you guys really care, but in America that used to be a really bad insult, something like that. Normalization and legitimization, right? It means, it's sort of also Skinnerian in a way. It's that psychological thing of conditioning. If you see it enough, you just think it's normal, so it no longer becomes a problem for you to then make the next step and do it. The alt-right, radicalization, marginalization. The alt-right is like the right which has been radicalized, especially in the USA. That they no longer think it's wrong to just offend people, that they're openly going out and saying, like, we hate anybody who's not white. We think white men should stand up for our power because we're better. And they just think it's okay to say that openly now. Marginalization, it's interesting because that is like sort of the opposite of normalization, where marginalization means you're being pushed out. But at the same time, if you're marginalized, you can also be more extreme. So SJWs, social justice warriors, and PC, which is politically correct culture. These are things usually that right-wing people, not necessarily extreme right-wing, but people who favor more freedom to just express things even if they're insulting. They use these in a bit of a negative way. The social justice warriors are more like liberal people, left-wing people who think we should be more polite and we should not say certain things because they're offensive. PC, politically correct, means sort of not offensive, not rude. But those are used in a very negative way by the right-wing people. GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. In America, these 4 companies control like 75% of the web traffic. So the idea that is it public space or private space and who's responsible? If these companies control 75% of that space, doesn't that make it public space because everybody's using it? Deep web, dark web, a little bit different. Deep web is like Facebook where you cannot search individual comments because they're not accessible to anybody who doesn't log in. So the deep web is things you have to log in order to even see. Dark web is even deeper than the deep web. Dark web is things where the URL is not searchable. So you have to know the specific numbers to type in to even get to the site in the first place. And usually, if you want to get to one of those sites, those are usually very extreme sites, and those numbers are posted like in discussion groups on Reddit, especially, is a very common site. Subreddits are part of the deep web, like the sub-discussion groups, you can't search them, but there are sub-discussion groups with titles like, you know, SJWs suck, or something like that. Or, you know, PC culture should be shot, or something. And then somewhere in that discussion, it gives like a group of numbers, and if you type that into your browser, you go to a website that then like tells you like, oh, this is how you can make a bomb and blow up like, you know, immigrants or something like that. So that's what the dark web is. It's like really, really deep. Reddit, yeah, anyway, it's a specific site. So if you don't know about it, but if any of these things are interesting, like I say, do your own research. I don't really expect you to totally understand all this just by hearing it once, right? But it's all sort of related to what kind of discussion we have in these spaces. So that's the end, and we're only 10 minutes late, not too bad. Okay. Any questions before we go to lunch? Anything you just have to know now? All right, that's good. In that case, this part of the seminar is done. And let me just look at the schedule briefly before you go. So it's 12:10. So come back by 13:15. Okay, 1:15. And at 1:15, I'll tell you which team is in which place, or you can draw like your place in the debate. And then we'll continue on with a practice round, debating one of these motions. One of the 3 other ones, not the first one, okay? Okay, go ahead, have a nice lunch, thank you.